They laughed before she ever said a word, and that was the first mistake they made. The sound rolled across the courtroom like cheap thunder, sharp, smug, and careless. It came from the row of officers seated near the prosecution table, men who wore their uniforms like armor and their confidence like a shield no one had ever challenged. One of them leaned back in his chair, glanced toward the woman entering through the rear doors, and smirked so openly even the clerk looked away. "Must be lost," he muttered, loud enough for half the room to hear. A few chuckles followed. Another officer added, "Maybe she's here to clean up after the hearing." More laughter. The woman did not react. She moved at an even pace down the center aisle, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, each step measured, calm, almost quiet enough to disappear beneath the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She wore a charcoal coat, simple pearl earrings, and carried a slim leather folder under one arm. No designer labels. No entourage. No visible badge. Nothing about her appearance fit the version of power those men respected. And so they dismissed her before she reached the front row. In a courthouse downtown where reputations mattered more than truth, that happened often. The room itself was built to feel intimidating. Tall ceilings. Cold marble walls. Flags standing motionless in the corners. The judge's bench raised high enough to remind everyone who was expected to feel small. People whispered in benches packed with defendants' families, reporters, interns, and citizens waiting for their own names to be called. It was a Wednesday morning in late October, grey skies outside, 48 degrees in the city, and the kind of chill that stayed in your coat even indoors. Cases were stacked from morning through afternoon. Lives reduced to schedules. But the second she entered, something changed. Not because she demanded attention. Because she refused to chase it. She took a seat at the empty counsel table without asking permission. She placed the folder in front of her and folded her hands. Then she waited. Officer Ryan Mercer noticed first. Broad shoulders, silver badge, 20 years. Of getting away with being the loudest man in every room. He stood halfway, grinning toward the others. He called out, dragging the word like an insult. "That table's for attorneys and officials." She looked up slowly. Her eyes were steady, unreadable, and far too calm for someone being mocked in public. "I'm aware," she said. Her voice was smooth, low, and controlled. It only made them laugh harder. Mercer spread his hands theatrically. "Then this should be interesting." Even the bailiff smirked. The judge had not entered yet, and in that space before authority officially arrived, men like Mercer believed they owned the room. The woman opened her folder. Inside were neatly arranged documents, color tabs, handwritten notes, and names highlighted in yellow. She glanced once toward Mercer, then wrote something down. He frowned for half a second, then covered it with another joke. "Taking notes on how court works." More laughter. She wrote again. Somewhere near the back, a reporter lowered his phone and started watching more carefully. Imagine standing there, hearing strangers decide your worth in seconds, hearing them mistake silence for weakness and calm for fear. Many people would have answered. Many would have walked out. She did neither. She simply looked around the room as if measuring walls no one else could see. Then she checked the clock above the judge's bench. 9:02 a.m. Right on time. Outside the closed courtroom doors, footsteps approached in perfect rhythm. Heavy, coordinated, official. The laughter inside continued for another 3 seconds before everyone heard it. Then the room went still. The handle turned once, then the courtroom doors opened with a slow authority no one inside could ignore. For people entered in dark suits, moving with the quiet discipline of those who did not need introductions. Their steps were synchronized, their faces composed, their eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. No one laughed now. Officer Ryan Mercer straightened first, confusion replacing the grin he had worn only moments earlier. He looked toward the bailiff, then toward the clerk, searching for someone else to explain what he did not understand. No one moved. The lead figure, a tall man with close-cropped hair and an earpiece barely visible beneath his collar, walked directly to the woman seated at counsel table. He stopped beside her chair and gave a respectful nod. He said. Just one word. But the way he said it landed harder than any speech. The woman closed her folder gently and rose to her feet. The room watched in complete silence. Judge Leonard Holloway entered through the side chamber at that exact moment, robe swaying as he climbed to the bench. He paused mid-step when he saw the unexpected group standing near the front. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, irritation masking uncertainty. He was a man used to immediate answers. This time, none came fast enough. Mercer stepped forward, eager to reclaim control. "Your Honor, this is some misunderstanding. We were about to begin." The woman turned toward the bench, posture straight, expression calm. "Yes," she said. "We are." Her voice carried cleanly through the chamber. Not loud. Not forced. Yet every person heard it. Judge Holloway narrowed his eyes. "And you are?" It was a simple question, but the room could feel something shifting beneath it. Reporters leaned forward. A stenographer stopped typing. Even the clock seemed louder now, each second tapping against the walls. The woman reached into her coat pocket and placed a credential wallet on the table. She opened it with one hand and angled it toward the bench. Holloway's face changed first. His jaw tightened, then loosened. He leaned closer, then sat back slowly. The color in the room seemed to drain with him. Mercer took one step backward before he realized he had moved. The woman let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to become fear. Then she spoke. "Vanessa Carter, Secretary of Homeland Security." No one breathed. It was not just her title. It was the certainty in her tone, the complete absence of ego, the unmistakable sound of someone who had no need to prove what was already true. Mercer blinked twice. "That is not possible," he said softly, mostly to himself. Vanessa looked at him for less than a second. "It became possible long before you laughed." A murmur rippled through the gallery, then died as quickly as it started. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. "Madam Secretary, had we known that," Vanessa interrupted, "is precisely the point." She turned toward the rows of officers. "You behaved the way you did because you thought no one important was watching." The words hit harder than accusation because everyone knew they were true. Imagine realizing the mask only falls when you think it is safe to wear it. Mercer's confidence was gone now, replaced by the stiff panic of a man replaying every careless word in his head. Vanessa opened her folder again. Inside were photographs, reports, internal complaints, transfer requests, and signed statements. Names. Dates. Patterns. "This hearing," she said, glancing from the bench to the officers, "was never about the scheduled case." She lifted one page, then another. It was about culture, misconduct, retaliation, and abuse of authority inside this courthouse. The lead agent beside her stepped forward and handed copies to the clerk. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter turned on his recorder. Judge Holloway gripped the arms of his chair. Mercer looked toward the exit. But by then, every door in the room was already closed. No one spoke for several seconds because silence had become the only safe language left in the room. Vanessa Carter stood at the front table, one hand resting lightly on the folder that had just changed everything. Officer Ryan Mercer remained frozen near the aisle, shoulders squared out of habit rather than confidence. Judge Leonard Holloway looked down at the document spread before him as if the pages might rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. They did not. Vanessa lifted another file and slid it toward the clerk. "Exhibit 12, she said calmly. "Recorded complaints dismissed without review." Then another. "Exhibit 13. Internal emails coordinating witness delays." Then another. "Exhibit 14. Selective case scheduling tied to officer preference." Each page landed with a soft sound that somehow felt louder than the laughter from earlier. The courtroom audience leaned forward as one body. People who had arrived expecting routine paperwork were now watching the architecture of power crack in real time. Mercer finally found his voice. "This is outrageous," he said. "You cannot walk in here and ambush public servants." Vanessa turned toward him with a look so steady it made him regret speaking before she answered. "Mr. Mercer, accountability often feels like an ambush to people who have avoided it." A few people in the gallery lowered their eyes to hide reactions they could not control. The lead federal agent beside her stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope on the prosecution table. "Notice of administrative suspension," he announced. Mercer stared at it but did not touch it. Holloway straightened in his chair, forcing authority back into his posture. "Madam Secretary, if there are concerns, there are channels for these matters." Vanessa nodded once. There were channels. They were blocked. She opened her folder again and withdrew a timeline nearly 3 feet long when unfolded. It stretched across the table like a map of buried decisions. Dates circled in red. Transfers. Complaints. Missing camera footage. Witnesses reassigned. Cases mysteriously postponed. The room could see the pattern even before she explained it. "This courthouse did not fail in one dramatic moment," she said. "It failed quietly, repeatedly, and in ways people hoped no one would connect. Imagine hearing the truth stated so plainly that excuses have nowhere left to hide." A reporter in the second row began typing at frantic speed. Another raised a phone until a bailiff quietly lowered it again. Holloway glanced toward the side door where judges usually entered and exited unseen. For the first time all morning, he seemed to wish he were somewhere else. Vanessa noticed. "Please remain seated, Your Honor. We are not finished." The words were polite. The effect was absolute. Mercer tried a different tone now, softer, almost pleading beneath the anger. "You are doing this because of a joke?" Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. "No. I am doing this because jokes reveal what policies try to hide." The sentence moved through the room like cold air. She continued, "Disrespect is often the visible symptom of a deeper disease." Then she pointed to the files. "And these records show the disease has been here for years." One of the younger officers in the back removed his badge clip and stared at it in his hands. Another quietly stepped away from the front row as if distance might become innocence. Holloway cleared his throat again. "What happens now?" Vanessa closed the folder at last. "Now the public record begins." The lead agent handed subpoenas to the clerk. Another agent moved toward the rear doors and opened them. More investigators entered carrying evidence boxes labeled by date and department. Gasps rose from the gallery before being swallowed by stunned quiet. Mercer's face had gone pale. Holloway gripped the bench harder. Vanessa looked around the courtroom, meeting the eyes of citizens, staff, officers, and reporters alike. "This room was built to deliver justice," she said. "Today it will finally start." And for the first time since morning began, no one doubted who was in charge. The weight of the moment settled over the courtroom like winter air, sharp and impossible to ignore. Investigators moved with quiet purpose, placing evidence boxes along the side wall, each one marked with dates, department seals, and chain of custody labels that told their own story before a single lid was opened. Reporters in the gallery stopped pretending to be observers and became witnesses. Pens moved. Phones vibrated. Names were already traveling beyond the room. Vanessa Carter remained standing at the front table, composed in a way that made everyone else look hurried. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Clerk," she said, "please read the first summary into the record." The clerk hesitated, hands trembling slightly as he opened the top file. "Complaint log review," he began. 27 citizen complaints against courthouse officers over 4 years. 23 closed without interview. 4 marked unresolved. None forwarded for external review. Each sentence struck the room harder than the last. Ryan Mercer stared ahead, jaw tight, as if refusing to react might somehow erase the words. Judge Leonard Holloway shifted in his chair, the movement small but revealing. Men comfortable with power rarely knew what to do when facts refused to bow. Vanessa turned one page in her folder. Read the next. The clerk swallowed. Scheduling irregularities. Cases involving officer misconduct repeatedly delayed. Witness notification sent late or to incorrect addresses. Multiple dismissals tied to administrative error. A low murmur spread through the benches before fading under the judge's gavel. Holloway struck once, but the sound lacked force. Even he seemed to hear it. Imagine spending years believing the system protects you, only to learn it was keeping receipts. Mercer finally stepped forward. This proves nothing about me. His voice carried anger, but fear had entered it now, thin and unmistakable. Vanessa met his eyes. Then you should welcome transparency. She nodded toward an investigator, who opened another box and removed a stack of body camera audit reports. Officer Mercer, she said, your footage was unavailable during 6 separate incidents. Mercer answered too quickly. Technical failures happen. Vanessa did not blink. 6 times in 14 months. No one in the room moved. A younger officer in the second row lowered his head. Another quietly loosened his collar. Holloway tried to regain control. Madam Secretary, this is not the proper venue for a public spectacle. Vanessa looked toward the bench with measured patience. A courthouse becomes a spectacle when justice is performed instead of practiced. The gallery went still again. Some truths arrive so cleanly they silence everyone. She motioned to the lead agent, who placed a digital recorder on the clerk's desk. Play file 3. A click sounded. Then voices filled the room. Casual voices. Familiar voices. Officers joking about defendants, mocking complaints, discussing which cases could be pushed to favorable dates. One laugh was unmistakably Mercer's. Another voice, lower and slower, matched Holloway closely enough that several heads turned toward the bench at once. The judge's face tightened. This recording may be inadmissible, he said. Vanessa answered immediately. This hearing is administrative, not criminal. Your concern is noted. The recorder continued for 12 more seconds before she stopped it. 12 seconds was enough. Mercer's shoulders had lost their rigid certainty. Holloway removed his glasses and set them down carefully, as though precise movements might restore dignity. Vanessa walked a few steps toward the center of the room. There are people here today who came expecting traffic citations, custody motions, and routine hearings, she said. Instead, they are seeing why routine became dangerous. Her gaze moved across the public benches, where mothers held folders, workers checked watches, and ordinary citizens stared at the front with stunned attention. When institutions forget who they serve, every small abuse becomes policy. She turned back to Mercer. And every laugh becomes evidence. The lead agent approached with another envelope. Officer Ryan Mercer, he announced, you are ordered to surrender department credentials pending formal review. Mercer did not reach for the envelope. He looked around the room instead, searching for allies. He found only lowered eyes, turned faces, and distance where loyalty had once stood. Ryan Mercer did not move for several seconds because motion would have meant accepting reality. The envelope remained extended in front of him, held by the lead federal agent with calm patience. Around the courtroom, people watched the way crowds always do when confidence begins to collapse. Some with curiosity. Some with satisfaction. Some with the uneasy awareness that they had laughed earlier too. Mercer finally took the envelope, but only after glancing toward Judge Leonard Holloway as if expecting rescue from the bench. None came. Holloway sat rigid, hands folded too neatly, eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the gallery. It was the posture of a man trying to look composed while his options disappeared one by one. Vanessa Carter returned to the counsel table and opened another folder. The papers inside were arranged with the precision of someone who respected facts more than drama. We will continue, she said. No one objected. The clerk read the next summary into the record. Witness intimidation concerns. 3 former courthouse employees reported pressure to alter statements regarding officer conduct. 2 resigned within 60 days. 1 requested transfer after repeated retaliation. A woman in the 3rd row covered her mouth. An older man beside her slowly removed his cap. The room was no longer hearing allegations. It was hearing memories confirmed. Mercer found his voice again, rougher now. People complain when they do not get their way. Vanessa looked at him without anger, which somehow felt worse. Sometimes they do, she said. And sometimes they complain because no one else will listen. She motioned toward the side wall. Another investigator opened a box and removed employee exit interviews, each sealed and dated. These statements were never reviewed by independent oversight, she added. They were archived internally and forgotten. Holloway leaned forward. Madam Secretary, enough. This court has procedures. Vanessa turned toward him. Your Honor, procedure without integrity is theater. The sentence landed so cleanly that even the reporters paused before typing it down. Imagine spending years behind a raised bench only to realize height does not equal respect. Holloway's face reddened, but he said nothing. Outside, faint sirens moved through downtown traffic, distant and ordinary, a reminder that the city beyond these walls was still moving while this room stood still inside its own reckoning. Vanessa stepped into the center aisle and addressed the gallery directly. Many of you came here because you had no choice. A summons. A hearing. A family matter. A paycheck tied to attendance. You trusted this building to be fair even when life was not. Heads nodded slowly across the benches. That trust was treated as unlimited. It is not. She then turned back to Mercer. Do you remember January 12th? Mercer blinked. No. Vanessa lifted a report. Single mother cited incorrectly. Missed work to contest it. Charges dropped when body camera audio contradicted testimony. She placed it down. March 21st. Mercer stayed silent. College student detained in hallway because he asked for directions. No apology issued. Another page. August 4th. Mercer's jaw tightened. Vanessa closed the file. Patterns do not need your memory. They have records. A low murmur rose again, heavier this time. One of the younger officers in the back quietly unclipped his badge and placed it in his pocket as though ashamed to display it. Another stepped out through a side door without speaking. Holloway noticed and called for order, but the command sounded smaller than before. The lead federal agent approached the bench carrying a sealed packet. Judge Holloway, he said respectfully, this is notice of ethics review and temporary recusal recommendation pending inquiry. Holloway stared at the packet like it belonged to another life. His hand trembled once before he steadied it on the wood. Vanessa watched him with neither triumph nor pity. Authority is not immunity, she said softly. It is responsibility. The room absorbed those words in silence. Mercer looked around again for allies and found none. Holloway looked at the bench beneath him and seemed to understand, perhaps for the first time, that furniture can elevate a person only until truth walks in. The courtroom no longer felt like a place where decisions were handed down from above. It felt like a place where buried things were being brought into the light one by one. Judge Leonard Holloway remained seated, but the height of the bench had lost its power. Ryan Mercer stood near the aisle holding an envelope that had turned his badge into memory. Around them, citizens who had arrived expecting ordinary hearings now sat motionless, watching something far rarer than punishment. They were watching accountability become public. Vanessa Carter glanced toward the rear doors, then back to the clerk. Call the next witness summary, she said. The clerk opened another packet, voice steadier now than before. Former record supervisor, anonymous submission verified through counsel. States multiple case files involving officer complaints were reassigned, delayed, or marked incomplete after direct verbal requests from senior courthouse personnel. Holloway lifted his head sharply. That is hearsay. Vanessa answered without looking at him. It is corroborated by metadata, timestamps, and server logs. An investigator immediately placed printed system records on the clerk's desk. Entry times. Deleted revisions. Restored archives. Quiet evidence from machines that did not care who held office. Imagine believing your secrets were safe because only people knew them, then learning the timestamps remembered everything. A reporter in the front row whispered, "My God," before resuming notes. Mercer shifted his weight for the first time in minutes. He was no longer angry enough to posture. Now he looked tired. "This was never about justice," he said. "You came here to embarrass us." Vanessa finally turned toward him fully. "No, Officer Mercer. Embarrassment is what happens when truth arrives late." The room absorbed the line in complete silence. She walked slowly toward the public benches where families, workers, and defendants sat clutching folders on their laps. "Many people in this room have felt small here," she said. "Not because the law required it. Because arrogance did." Several faces lowered. One young man near the back nodded with tears in his eyes he quickly wiped away. Holloway tried again to recover control. "Madam Secretary, this proceeding has exceeded any reasonable scope." Vanessa faced the bench. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the scope was exceeded years ago. We are only measuring it now." The lead federal agent stepped forward carrying another sealed packet. This one was thicker than the last. He placed it carefully before the judge. "Supplemental review notice," he announced. "Includes communication records, undisclosed meetings with defense representatives, and preferential scheduling contacts." Holloway did not touch it. His hand stayed flat on the bench as though gripping stillness itself. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed louder in the silence. Outside, rain had begun to tap softly against the courthouse windows. A gray afternoon was moving in. Vanessa returned to the center aisle. "There is a myth," she said, voice calm and measured, "that institutions fail all at once. They do not. They fail in inches." A laugh ignored. A complaint buried. A rule bent for the right person. A door opened for some and closed for others. Each phrase landed like a bell. Then one day everyone asks how it got this bad. Mercer looked down at the envelope in his hand as if it might explain how quickly power can become paper. One of the younger officers rose from the back row and stepped forward. He said quietly, voice shaking, "I filed 2 complaints last year. Nothing happened." Vanessa nodded once. "They will now." He sat down, shoulders trembling with relief more than fear. That moment changed the room again. People who had been silent all morning began whispering names, dates, incidents to one another. Memory was waking up. Holloway noticed it too. "Order," he called, striking the gavel twice. But the sound no longer commanded obedience. It only interrupted truth for a second. Vanessa waited for the room to settle, then spoke one final sentence before opening the next file. "When fear leaves a room, voices return." And all across the benches, people straightened in their seats as if they had just remembered they were allowed to. The room had changed in ways no architect could design. Walls were the same. Benches were the same. Flags still stood motionless in the corners. But fear had shifted sides. The people in the gallery now sat taller, while those who once carried themselves with easy authority seemed smaller with every passing minute. Rain traced thin lines down the courthouse windows, turning the gray afternoon outside into a blurred watercolor of city streets and flashing traffic lights. Inside, Vanessa Carter opened the next file. "We will hear from those who were ignored," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, yet no one mistook it for softness. The clerk called the first name from a sealed list. A middle-aged woman in a navy grocery uniform stood from the third row, clutching a worn handbag to her chest. She approached the front slowly, as if years of hesitation still weighed on each step. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. "Denise Walker." Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. I was cited here 2 years ago for disorderly conduct after asking why my son's hearing had been moved without notice. She glanced toward Ryan Mercer, then quickly away. I asked one question. They laughed and told me to sit down. The courtroom grew still again. Denise continued. I missed 2 shifts at work because of that citation. It was dropped later. No apology. No explanation. Vanessa nodded and said quietly, "Thank you for coming back." Denise's eyes filled, not with sadness but with the shock of finally being believed. She returned to her seat to soft murmurs of support. The next witness was a college student named Aaron Fields. He described being stopped in the hallway and questioned because he looked nervous while trying to find room numbers on his first day in court. "I was nervous because my mother was inside for eviction proceedings," he said. "But they treated me like I did not belong in the building." Holloway stared down at his bench, saying nothing. Mercer avoided looking at anyone now. Imagine carrying humiliation for years, only to learn it was not your burden to carry at all. Witness after witness followed. A retired janitor who reported hearing jokes about defendants after hours. A legal assistant whose scheduling concerns were ignored until she resigned. A veteran who said he stopped contesting tickets because every visit made him feel like he was entering enemy territory instead of public service. None of them shouted. None needed to. Truth spoken plainly can be louder than outrage. Vanessa listened to each person with full attention, taking notes by hand. She did not interrupt. She did not perform sympathy. She offered something rarer, respect. When the final witness sat down, the room remained silent long enough to hear the rain tapping harder against the glass. Then Judge Leonard Holloway cleared his throat. "These accounts are regrettable," he began, choosing each word like a man stepping around broken ground. "But anecdotal experiences do not define this institution." Vanessa looked up slowly. "No, Your Honor," she said. "Patterns do." She motioned toward the rows of statements now stacked on the clerk's desk. Different years. Different people. Same conduct. Same dismissal. Same harm. Holloway opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mercer suddenly spoke, voice strained and brittle. "You are turning complaints into convictions." Vanessa faced him. "No, Officer Mercer. I am turning silence into evidence." The sentence moved through the room like a current. A young reporter near the aisle whispered it under his breath while typing. The lead federal agent approached Vanessa and handed her a final envelope marked Priority Review. She opened it, read one page, then closed it again. Her expression did not change, but the room sensed another shift approaching. "There has been a response from departmental oversight," she said. Mercer's head lifted sharply. Holloway gripped the edge of the bench. Even the gallery leaned forward. Vanessa placed the envelope on the table between them. "Effective immediately, Interim Administration of Courthouse Security and Conduct Review is transferred to an external task force." She paused, then added, "And I have appointed its first director." No one moved. No one breathed. Then she looked directly at the younger officer who had admitted filing complaints and said, "Step forward, Officer Daniel Ruiz. You start today." For a moment, no one understood what they had just heard. Then every eye in the courtroom turned toward the back row where Officer Daniel Ruiz still stood half-hidden beside the wall, one hand resting near the badge he had quietly removed earlier. He looked around as if searching for the real person Vanessa Carter must have meant. "Me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa gave a single nod. "You filed complaints when it cost you something. You spoke when silence was safer. Step forward." Ruiz moved slowly down the aisle, the same path Vanessa had walked when laughter followed her entrance. This time there was no laughter. Only the sound of his shoes against the polished floor and the rain tapping the windows like distant applause. Ryan Mercer stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious," Mercer said. "He is a rookie compared to people in this room." Vanessa did not look away from Ruiz. That is exactly why he still remembers what service means. The sentence struck harder than any insult. Ruiz reached the front and stood beside the counsel table, posture rigid with uncertainty. He was younger than most officers present, early 30s, with tired eyes and the expression of someone who had spent years trying to do right in a place that rewarded the opposite. Vanessa handed him the sealed appointment letter. Temporary Director of Security Reform and Conduct Compliance, effective immediately. His hands shook as he accepted it. I do not know if I am ready. Vanessa's answer came without hesitation. Readiness is overrated. Integrity is not. A murmur moved through the gallery, warmer this time. Denise Walker began clapping softly. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds the room was filled with restrained but undeniable applause, the kind that rises when ordinary people witness something they had stopped believing could happen. Judge Leonard Holloway struck the gavel once, but even he knew better than to force silence now. Ruiz turned toward the benches, overwhelmed. He looked like a man being handed weight and trust at the same time. Vanessa placed a folder beside him. Your first actions are already prepared, she said. Independent complaint intake. Public review calendar. Camera audit compliance. Community liaison hours every Friday at 6 p.m. Ruiz opened the folder and stared at the neatly organized plans. You built this already. Vanessa allowed herself the faintest smile. I hoped someone worth building it for was still here. Imagine spending years thinking honesty was unnoticed, only to learn it was being measured all along. Mercer stepped forward again, anger now mixed with desperation. This is politics. Vanessa turned toward him at last. No, Officer Mercer. Politics protects image. Leadership protects people. He had no answer. Holloway slowly removed his robe chain and set it on the bench beside him, a small gesture that felt larger than speeches. I will comply with review procedures, he said quietly, not to Vanessa but to the room itself. It was the first honest sentence many believed they had heard from him in years. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond downtown, low and distant. Inside, investigators began collecting remaining credentials from officers named in the files. No shouting. No chaos. Just process, orderly and precise. The younger officers cooperated first. Several older ones hesitated, then followed when they realized resistance had nowhere to go. Ruiz watched it all with a stunned expression, then straightened his shoulders. Something had changed in him already. Vanessa stepped back, giving space without surrendering command. Remember this room, she told him. Not how it looked this morning. How it feels now. Ruiz nodded slowly. Different, he said. Honest, Vanessa corrected. Reporters captured every word. Citizens in the benches sat taller than when they arrived. Mercer looked smaller than his uniform. Holloway looked older than his title. And as the rain eased outside the windows, sunlight pushed through the clouds just enough to brighten the seal above the bench, where justice had always been engraved, waiting for someone to mean it. By the time the hearing ended, the courthouse felt like a building waking from a long sleep. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead. The marble floor still reflected rows of benches and polished shoes. Yet everything inside seemed altered by something invisible and permanent. People did not rush for the exits the way they usually did. They lingered in aisles, speaking in quiet voices, exchanging looks that carried relief, disbelief, and something many had not brought with them that morning, hope. Daniel Ruiz stood near the front table with the appointment letter in one hand and the reform folder in the other. He looked at the room not as a frightened officer anymore, but as someone who understood that trust had just been placed where convenience used to live. Investigators continued their work with steady efficiency, logging evidence boxes, collecting final signatures, escorting personnel through administrative procedures no one could delay now. Ryan Mercer sat alone on the front bench, shoulders lowered, envelope unopened beside him. There are moments when pride leaves a person so quietly only posture reveals it. Judge Leonard Holloway had stepped down from the bench and removed his robe. Without it, he looked less like a symbol and more like an aging man facing the cost of years spent confusing position with character. He passed Vanessa Carter near the center aisle and stopped. For a second, the entire room watched. "I should have intervened this morning," he said, voice low and unsteady. Vanessa regarded him calmly. "You should have years ago." She did not say it cruelly. Truth rarely needs cruelty. Holloway lowered his eyes and continued walking toward the side chamber, smaller with each step. Denise Walker approached next, still in her grocery uniform, handbag clasped at her side. She said, "I thought no one remembered people like us." Vanessa offered a warm nod. "Institutions forget. Records do not. And people should not." Denise smiled through tears she no longer tried to hide. Around them, others formed a quiet line. Aaron Field shook Ruiz's hand. A retired janitor thanked the clerk for finally listening. 2 young law interns asked where they could volunteer for community review nights. Change does not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it begins as a line of ordinary people deciding to stay instead of leave. Outside, the rain had fully passed. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows in long golden bands, warming the cold floor where gray shadows had stood all morning. Dust drifted in the light like tiny things finally visible. Vanessa gathered her folder, now thinner than when she entered. Most of what it carried had been transferred into the public record, where secrets lose power. Ruiz stepped toward her. "How did you know to come here today?" he asked. She glanced around the room. "Because laughter tells you where respect is missing." He nodded slowly, understanding more than the words alone. "And how did you know I would speak up?" Vanessa allowed the faint smile he had seen once before. "I did not. I only knew someone would." She turned toward the doors and began walking down the same center aisle where mocking voices had greeted her hours earlier. Now people stepped aside with genuine respect, not fear. Some nodded. Some whispered thanks. Some simply stood. Mercer watched her pass but could not meet her eyes. Ruiz could. "I will not waste this," he said. Vanessa paused at the threshold and looked back one final time at the bench, the badges, the citizens, the young officer holding new responsibility, and the room that had learned the difference between authority and honor. "See that you do not," she replied. Then she stepped into the bright afternoon. The courthouse doors closed behind her with a deep echo that rolled through marble halls and empty pride alike. And those who had laughed first would remember longest that power can command a room, but character can change it.